terms of the vagus nerve, though, I think that's an interesting discussion. So polyvagal theory is something I'll get to in this presentation in a few weeks' time. But to give you a spoiler alert and give you a bit of a preview, polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges talks about, so we always talk about the vagus nerve, and he talks about it as a nerve. It is a nerve, but it has three branches. And they are all evolutionarily different. And essentially, we have one that relates to freeze, one that relates to fight or fright, and one that relates to social engagement. And that's the hierarchical order. And so a couple of things there. This is just me ad-libbing here and going in different directions if you will let me for a second. We always go fight, fright, flight, fight, fright, fright, fight, flight, fright. You know, we put these three together, right? But I want you guys to be aware that freeze has different things happening. It's a different mechanism to fight or flight. So even though people put those together, the relationship of whether you're activating sympathetic or parasympathetic or both at the same time, freeze is actually sort of both at the same time. So at uni, we have this idea of you've got sympathetic and parasympathetic, and they're like a seesaw, right? If one goes up, the other goes down, or if you can even remember back to there, that's what it sort of feels like. That's not true. At times it looks like that, but they are independent. And what freeze is, you've got your foot on the accelerator and the brakes at the same time. Freeze is a burnout. So you can have heightened parasympathetic and heightened sympathetic and parasympathetic. Fight or flight is very sympathetically activated. And so just to wrap up this preview of what I'm going to say later so that you've heard it and then it'll make sense next time I say it. This is such a cool thing about the polyvagal theory. This is my biggest takeaway from the entire book or all the studies and all the theory is when you are in fight or flight, your brain sends inhibitory messages to the system that relates to freeze, right? So when you're in fight or flight, you don't want to freeze because you are not going to be safe. If you can fight off your attacker or get away from them, you don't want to freeze because you're much more vulnerable. Freeze is only to use as the escape when there is no escape, to shut down my senses so I don't feel when I'm giving up. It's the possum that plays dead, hoping that its attacker will just wander off because the attacker's not hungry. It's just playing with it. Does that make sense? So if you can fight or flee, your brain sends inhibitory messages to avoid freezing. Here's the really cool part. When you're socially engaged, your brain sends inhibitory messages to the fight or flight structures or mechanisms. So when you're socially engaged, it makes you less likely to dysregulate. And one of the cool mechanisms that relates to that is, we all heard of oxytocin, the love drug, mums and bubs, but also caring, compassion, a whole bunch of things produce oxytocin. Oxytocin sends inhibitory messages to the amygdala. So your amygdala is your fight or flight, your fear brain. Oxytocin sends inhibitory messages saying, I'm safe, I'm connected, you're not necessary here. So it makes you less likely to dysregulate. So in terms of that vagus nerve, it's much more complex than we think it is. And it's more than just heart rate, breath rate, elimination. It also has aspects of listening. The only sensory branch to the external world of the vagus nerve is in your ear. But then also things to do with facial expression as well. It innervates the face and ear in certain places. So yeah, so that's really cool. And that's why we do this connection relationship-based work. And that's why we see kids make eye contact better without us asking them to look at the talker, is we get them warm, connected, trusting, caring, compassion, oxytocin generating, fun, meaningful activities means that inhibitory messages are flying to their amygdala, so they feel safer, so they're more open for connecting. That was way more than 3 minutes and probably way too much to take on a Monday morning.
No, it was amazing.
It's cool, right? I
So
love
good.
that concept. The vagus nerve is so cool, so important.
So cool.